Snow at Heaven's Edge. Chapter 7. Chen Daming was always a fast walker, and especially so this morning. He was also, by his own account, a fast thinker, a brilliant man. Yet he chastised himself for not thinking of this plan earlier. Lady Lin had not only paid for the damages of last night's commotion, but forced the others to make reparations as well. He had more than sufficient money, but not nearly enough admiration or respect from reputable women. Not for a long time. If he could return her money, perhaps she would view him in a different light. She was married, but who knew behind closed doors and under bed sheets whether the union was a marital bliss or hell? Chen Daming was always one to hope. At the very least, the gesture was a convincing excuse for him to admire her charms. Innkeeper Chen, half muttering curses and half mumbling frantic nothings to himself, stumbled upon a piece of broken porcelain in the middle of the hallway outside a guest room. This is inexcusable. Suppose a guest cuts himself and demands compensation. That would be a tragedy. He shifted through the names of his servants, trying to remember the one responsible for this section of the inn. In his years as innkeeper, Chen had learned the importance of having a good pair of ears. They could tell you things that the eyes could not. Then and there he heard the low, inaudible whispers from a few rooms away. Curiosity drew him as a moth toward a flame. Secrets often brought with them profit. He made his way to the door where the sound came from and placed his ears as close as possible. Chen Daming had no moral scruples with eavesdropping or spying, and he often did so with utmost delight. Except this time, what he heard immediately expunged the grin from his face. His brows knitted, his lips dried, he wrung his hands as he listened. The low mumblings were about something important. Chen heard three distinct voices. A deep, resonant tone probably belonging to a large man, a flat, scattered one undoubtedly belonging to a skinnier person, and a third which sounded nasally. He made out the word boss several times and never preceded nor followed by any expletive. Wuxia also appeared often. The man spoke urgently, seemingly troubled. The elder brother was either sick or injured. Chen could not make out which. A few persons were cause for concern. He caught a few names from their increasingly frantic discussion. Son of a whore, where is your manhood? That dog, Wei Qingren. Boss said the kid, and they laughed, and the descriptive words, beautiful and exquisite, along with a few derogatory phrases, left Chen with very little doubts regarding the subject of their conversation. They dwelled on her much longer than the rest, but soon continued to name a few others. They mentioned one of the mas, but he did not know if it was the man or his pretty but mad wife. Another name came up, but the innkeeper could no longer keep track. His mind grasped frantically at threads in hopes of identifying the men behind their voices. Wu Chen had his share of bandits, but never in winter. Who might they be? The conversation took a turn when they whispered again in a more hushed tone that made it impossible for Chen Daming to make out until they revisited their favorite topic. With boss, I don't think. She would warm my bed first. Who? The fellow with her. Boss didn't mention him. Not a sniff of swordsman aura in him. Impotent yellow bastard. The men guffawed. Chen Daming visualized them huddling together and giggling like schoolchildren, except their plot was much less innocent. How would boss first? Someone finally proposed. That would require little cooperation. The voice was old but soothingly familiar, and yet to Chen Daming it was much colder than the freezing frost. His heart thumped frantically, threatening to explode. An invisible hand clutched at his throat, making it hard to breathe. Beads of hot sweat gushed from his pores as his eyes darted back and forth while his mind contemplated what to do next. The door swung open, and he fell to his knees, staring into the leering faces of the men inside. Welcome, Innkeeper Chen. Chen Daming heard none of this as the world around him swirled and he descended into blackness. The maddening wind continued to hurl spittle of ice and snow. Ma Wuliang had fallen silent, and Ma Xianda wondered whether somewhere within her she too felt the gravity of the task. The scoundrel was smart. He even changed his name to that of the slain so that it took Ma Xianda a very long time to find him. This man was responsible for their 20 years of pain. He yearned furiously for this day, carving out each miserable second of existence with the hope that all shall be made right. He had fought countless battles in his youth and countless more since then, but what he felt now, that sense of anticipation, of dread, of desire, only occurred once, long ago. A thin mask of perspiration glistened on his face as the rhythmic clunk of his armor announced his return before the guards started shouting his name. "General Ma has returned!" The announcement passed from guard to guard, echoed through the gardens to the archery grounds, where both his in-laws waited. "You may enter, General," a guard said and gestured with his right hand. "Please, this way." Ma Xianda took off his helm and made his obeisance. "There is no need for such courtesy," spoke his father-in-law. "This is no military affair, but a matter of family business. Yours and mine." The man wore a severe expression, and he sounded grave, almost as if the mere utterance of these words had aged him decades. "No need to seem surprised. I know who you are. You have come to seek my life." The old general smiled as casually as if he was talking about the weather. "Do you think that Liu Wenjing would marry off his daughter without investigating the background of her husband-to-be? Do you think that the past can be hidden? No. And neither can blood be washed free from your hands." Ma Xianda's eyes blazed with an intensity that shook the hardened general. The fire, like those of a comet, was short-lived. Liu Wenjing sighed. "This is what I fear. A hatred that burns deep and smolders within the dark recesses of the soul cannot be allowed to exist. It would be the ruin of us all, including you. Xianda, all these years, I have lie awake at night, drenched in cold sweat by the recurrent nightmares that plagued me just as they do you. I was certain then that I have carried out my orders perfectly. No member of the Ma clan was left alive. I was sure of it. Yet, I still could not sleep. Do you know why?" He paused, more to reflect than to catch his breath. "Because I have both betrayed and failed myself. I had always thought that I was a true hero, a man who can shoulder the heavens. I have killed thousands on the battlefield, so many that a day where someone did not die under my sword became a rarity. I thought that was courage. But I found out that I was wrong. It took a greater man to say no, to not kill. Not because killing was wrong, but because you don't believe in the reason behind the act." He stopped, looking directly into Ma Xianda's eyes as if to accentuate his words. "I didn't have the courage to refuse the order. I didn't have the courage to question the code, the law, the government. The trouble of dealing with your clan shifted squarely onto my shoulders. Shoulders that were too weak to carry that weight for all these years. For all these, I'm deeply ashamed." "Stop, father, stop," urged Ma Xianda as his entire body tensed up, fists clenched and teeth gritted. "No, Xianda, you cannot bury it. If you love Wu Nian, you cannot live in turmoil. I would not allow it. You have been my son-in-law for almost a year, and I have never really given you any gift of value. Today, I'll give you the opportunity you have awaited for so long. Whatever the outcome," he turned to his son and his loyal retainers, "it would be reported as an accident." Tears rolled down Nan Ying's face. He knew the meaning of his father's words. He looked at his brother-in-law, trying to gauge what he planned to do. The reflection of his drawn sword said it all. "Then I shall take my vengeance today," Ma Xianda said. The swords that clashed rung like temple bells, deafening and foreboding. Ma Xianda swung his sword as he had wanted to live, full and open. No longer was there a need to hide anything. The one secret he harbored lay bare under the blistering sun. He had no trouble leaping and somersaulting to and fro despite the heavy armor, barraging his opponent with a fury of slices and cuts from seemingly everywhere. And yet he was unable to break old Liu's defense. The old man parried and blocked every attack. Xianda thrust his sword and the old Liu deflected. He cut, and the old man pivoted or brushed the blade away with his own. Liao Nanying watched with increasing trepidation. His father had no intent to attack. Even if he did, Liao Wenzheng was in the declining years while Ma Xianda was in his prime. To remain solely on the defensive was suicidal. He had to do something. Ma Xianda locked swords with old Liao and pressed hard, forcing the general back. As the old man regained his footing, Ma spun and hit him with the back of his blade. The blow was hard enough to dent the armor and send a mouthful of blood to spill from the old general's mouth. He collapsed and rolled to his side. Liao Nanying had seen enough. He flicked his wrist and Ma Xianda spun backwards in midair, landing off balance and falling to one knee. A small dagger protruded from his chest. "Father!" shouted Nanying and rushed to the old man's side. Xianda, Nanying, why? Why?" The old man's face was a mixture of sadness and pain. His son moved him with his filial piety, but the Liaos have wronged the Ma's yet again. Liu Wenjing brushed his son aside and scurried sheepishly on hands and knees toward Ma Xianda, who had rose unsteadily to his feet. The flying dagger was a true surprise. Liao Nanying had practiced and shown it off on various occasions, but the only account of his accuracy, until now, was an expedition in which his throw fell a rebel leader. The dagger in Ma Xianda stuck a little medial to his right shoulder joint, making it all but impossible for the man to lift the sword with that arm in the near future. General Liao could hear the click of a sword as it slid out from its scabbard. "Have you forgotten my orders, Nanying?" he shouted. Another click. The grapple shuffled behind him, but he did not look back. He focused on the man in front of him. They each took labored breaths. His lungs burned and his head pulsated, but the old man felt very much alive. His senses were more alert, so much so that he heard the droplets of blood trickled onto the dirt as it ran down the fingertips of his son-in-law. "Please, after you have your revenge, do no more harm to my family, especially Wu Niang. She really loves you, and I see that you genuinely feel the same. Treat her well." With that said, the old general closed his eyes and lowered his head. The birds chirped, the insects buzzed, a warm summer breeze floated lazily by, carrying the scent of the flower gardens with it. "It is a good day to die," he thought. Ma Xianda's voice punctuated the silence. "My love for Wu Niang is real, and so is my hate for you." And those were the last words he said to his father-in-law. "She's rather cute," said Pao Xiang. "The little one?" asked Gao Ming. "The big one." Gao Ming laughed, and Pao Xiang joined him. "No, I'm serious. She's made quite an impression on me," she said in a serious tone and glanced upward in a forward-looking type of manner. He leaned in, catching a whiff of her fragrance, sweet like a million blooming flowers. His hand wrapped around her wispy waist as he planted kisses on her face, on her back. She let out an intermittent moan. He had enough. Sweeping her off her feet, he carried the girl onto the bed and dropped her. She was coy and inviting when she looked up. Gao Ming joined her as his hands reached for her belt and began to undress her while he continued to kiss and nibble at her until she lay bare before him. He stopped. Gao Ming's hand touched the scar slightly above her left breast. Its ugly, hideous form contrasted sharply to the white ivory skin that made her so popular. He rode to his side and held her, hiding behind her back. "This is reality," she said, without turning around to look at him. She was branded so no man would take her, so that she would not run away, so that anyone who ever laid eyes on it would know what type of woman she was. He had closed his eyes, feeling the smoothness of her back and the warmth of her skin. "Is this why you do it?" Feeling almost foolish for asking that question. Everyone had their own reasons. There was no point in trying to understand. They were all different. He did not expect her to answer, but she did. "No, not because of this." She held his hand in hers and placed it over the scar. "But for people like her, and people like you, probably for much the same reason you do it." She turned, but he turned away. She pulled his head back so that she could stare into his eyes. They were pensive, but ultimately lost. She kissed him so that he would close them. He did. "Not like mine. Yours is much more generous. Much more so." Feng Xian moaned. Her head throbbed. Each pulsation took with it her sense of reality. As her eyes adjusted to daylight, she saw that her hands were painfully pale and numb. She brushed off the snow that had covered her while she was unconscious. Then panic hit her. Li Xiang. Where is she? The girl had come back with the young man, Gao Ming. That was his name. Li Xiang had looked jubilant, and then a worried look not befitting a child suddenly shrouded her cheerful, fearless demeanor. She muttered something about returning to the inn and finding her Wu-ai Gaga. Feng Xian groaned. She massaged her head, treating the hard skull like some muscle that could be massaged back to comfort. It helped nonetheless. She needed her memory and wit. His sword is deadly, she remembered Li Xiang's comment. Is he responsible for this? He had just saved us. She began to doubt her logic. Her head hurt, but she was not sure whether it was from the thinking or from her collision with the solid stone wall. What did their assailant look like? They were walking, no, running. They sped down the large streets and small alleys like this morning. Tell Lin Wu-ai, she recalled the task that fate thrust upon them. He's dangerous, isn't he? She had asked the precocious child about the young man. Before the girl could answer, she screamed as she flew up into the air as if plucked from the ground like a chick by an eagle. A strong force propelled Xiaoyan toward the wall. Everything went black. Something deep within told her to leave Wucheng. Just run. Away from here. Something bad is coming. She sat there, paralyzed by indecision. No, the Lins need to know. I owe them that much. The day was still young, but the sun was fading fast. She got up. Bright floating stars flooded her vision. She took in a deep, cool breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was already running. Hey, you've made it to the end. If you like it so far, please subscribe and like. This lets me know I'm on the right path. And if you can't wait for the next installment of Snow at Heaven's Edge, then head on over to Amazon and read the story in its entirety for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Alternatively, you can check out Dreamweaver and Duo on Mount Taiyuan as well. Both of these stories are done and available for free here on YouTube, Spotify, and Audible. If you want to support me, please consider going to my Ko-fi and being a member. Have a great day.